everyone, and welcome back to our journey down the road to somewhere. And glad you could join us today as we are heading into episode 5 of season 2. Just want to remind you that we're dividing season 2 up into 2 separate parts because we'll take a little break during Easter time. This is our 5th episode in this season, and we have one more than 6, and then we'll be taking a little bit of a break. We're in the middle of Lent, so I hope that that you're having a good spiritual experience during this time as you prepare for the celebration of the resurrection of Christ. I did want to say, in case I forget later, you can kind of see that episode 5 is really all about King David, and there is one great psalm, Psalm 51, that was written after David's, we'll talk a little later about one of his big mistakes that he makes during his life. But it's a great psalm for Lent season, because Lent is a time when you're preparing yourself for celebrating Easter, and usually historically a lot of that preparation had to do with kind of searching, allowing the Holy Spirit to show things in your life maybe that aren't quite right. And Psalm 51 is a great psalm of confession, so you might just remember that. I can't remember, we might hit it again as we move along. I just can't remember. So we are in the state of Missouri in episode 2. We're going to make 12 stops when we get to the end, but again, breaking it up into 2 sets of 6 stops. And you might remember that, again, as we take a little bit of look at the book, The Road to Somewhere, and our 2 main characters, John and Joy, as they head down Route 66. The last stop that we were at was Cuba, Missouri. And remember that as we, and today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be heading into Rolla. And if you look at the map, Rolla is that straight up dot. The map's a little confusing. It can make it look like Arlington comes before Rolla, but actually Arlington is our next stop, stop number 6. But we're going to be heading to Rolla, Missouri, and one of the things you might remember is that last time, as John and Joy headed out of Cuba, that it's the first time that Joy got behind the wheel of our 66 Corvette. And remember that this picture doesn't quite capture what they're driving it completely because their car has been radically modified, and so Joy is behind the wheel. It looks like a 66 Corvette, but it's running a modified Chevy LS3 engine that was found in Corvettes and has modern running gear. So this car really, really runs. And Joy gets behind the wheel, and she takes advantage of the fact that this is such a great, great car. As they're driving down the road, by the way, in between Cuba and Rolla, one of the iconic Route 66 icons is the world's largest chair. And at a point in time, this rocking chair was considered to be the world's largest chair. It was over 40 feet high. It's funny because after it was declared that, there was a little town in Illinois that decided they wanted the world's largest rocking chair, and so they built one that was about 20 feet bigger. And then if you go online and look up the world's largest chair, you'll be kind of amazed at how many different places around the world now claim to have the world's largest chair. So anyway, this is one of the attractions on Route 66 that a lot of people stop at, but Joy and John, they just kind of blow past it, obviously noticing it, on their way to Rolla, Missouri. And so they pull into Rolla, In the book, The Road to Somewhere, they actually are going to stop and have lunch here. They have a couple of choices. One is Randy's Roadkill Barbecue, which used to have the motto, "You kill it, we grill it." And I happened to notice online that they've changed their motto. I guess that was perhaps no longer a politically correct way to describe their restaurant. So now it's just something like best barbecue in town or something. But they have lunch, and then where they're really heading, and what Rolla is probably best known for, is that it has one of Missouri's universities there. It's gone by a couple of different names, but it's currently known as the Missouri University of Science and Technology. And when I was writing my book, I knew, because I grew up in Kansas City and went to college both in Columbia and in Kansas City, I can tell you that the students that went to this school were the really smart kids, and particularly those that were smart in math and sciences. And so it's kind of the MIT of the state of Missouri, and this is where Joy wants to shoot the video because she's aware of a very unique feature at this university that John isn't, and that is that, what do really smart kids do while the rest of the gang or the rest of the, colleges, kids are out partying and having, what they would consider to be a good time. And I just kind of jokingly thought, well, what would a student here at this school do for a good time? And what they did is that in 1984, this particular school was known for having a high-power water jet lab. I'm not completely sure of all that entailed, but what they did is they used that technology, and the students decided to build a replica of Stonehenge. And so sitting out front of one of the buildings there at the university is this replica that's actually exactly half the size of Stonehenge, a little bit smoother, but it was built with that water jet technology. And Joy thought that this would be a great place to shoot the video for Rolla Missouri. And so they set up the shot and they begin to film their little short video, and John gives a little bit of background on the city of Rolla and then talks a little bit about this model of Stonehenge. By the way, one of the things is that when they finished it, they brought in a Druid priest from Ireland to bless it. Just kind of a crazy, thing that went on back when they decided to replicate Stonehenge. So after John kind of gives a little bit of a description, talks a little bit about this, then he transitions into his short teaser, as he does on each of these videos they're filming during their trip down Route 66. And the next book of the Bible that he's going to give a little teaser on is 2 Samuel. And remember that in the Hebrew Bible, 1 and 2 Samuel were simply one book. So if you might remember, 1 Samuel ended with the tragic death of the first king of Israel, Saul. In the Hebrew Bible, it would have gone right into the next part of the story, which of course has to do with the second king of Israel. But again, one book in the Tanakh. And the second book of Samuel in our Bible really is the story of King David from the time that he becomes king almost to his death. A part of David's story, you might remember, actually is found back in 1 Samuel. And 1 Samuel, when the people ask for a king and Saul becomes the first king of Israel, We're talking about 1070 BC, so over 1,000 years before the time of Christ. And of course, Saul, although he was, tall and handsome and looked like a king, you remember that 1 Samuel really talked about sort of his tragic, decline. And that final scene in 1 Samuel where he kills himself by falling on his sword. So the second king of the United Kingdom had already been chosen by God. And back in 1 Samuel again, Samuel has already anointed David to become the future king. But he has years, really, during the reign of Saul, where he's not the king yet. And he has a great respect, actually, not so much, I don't think, for Saul as a person, but for the fact that he was the anointed king of Israel. But when Saul dies, the people come to David and ask him to become their king. By the way, I think there are probably two events in the life of David that many people are familiar with, even if they don't know that the events come from which book of the Bible. The first being the battle between David and Goliath, which actually is back in 1 Samuel, and we'll look a little bit at the second event that I think most people are familiar with. David is actually crowned and anointed king in the city of Hebron. Let me see, I think I might have a map. No, that's not it. I'll come to it in a minute. He's actually anointed to be the king of Israel in the city of Hebron, and he will rule from that city for 7 years. Now, David, of course, grew up in Bethlehem, which is only 5 miles from Jerusalem. But at the time that David became king, what we know as Jerusalem was actually named Jebus or Yebus. There is actually no J in the Hebrew alphabet, and all of our translations of words like Jerusalem, for instance, or John in the Hebrew would have actually begun with what we might transliterate as a Y sound. So Jerusalem would be Jerusalem. And it was ruled by the Jebusites, which were one of the tribes, and this was one of the cities that during the conquest of Joshua, the Jebusites were not defeated. Part of that was because Jebus was such a strategic location. It sat really on the top of a hill, and it was a fortress city that believed that they were invincible. And David, having grown up quite close to this, just 5 miles away really, probably was so familiar with this that as he became first of all, an adult, and I have a feeling that this was probably being ruminated on perhaps for a number of years as he was ruling out of Hebron. He was so familiar with this city and decided that he wanted this to be the capital of his kingdom. And so David actually attacked the city. That historically, we think that his army came in through the one water source into the city at the time, and it would have looked a bit like this. It was not a huge city in any way, and it sat on what came to be known as Mount Zion, or the city of David, actually. I just thought I'd show you that later, this is a little bit past the time of Christ, actually. This is almost right before the Romans destroyed the ancient city, but the entire city of David was just this little piece of what eventually became a much larger Jerusalem. There were 2 hills here. One was Mount Zion, which again became known as the city of David. The other was Mount Moriah, and Mount Moriah had a piece of land that David had purchased to build the temple. And so Mount Moriah would have been over here. And much of what you see on this diagram of Jerusalem in 63 BC just wouldn't have existed at the time of David, but at the time of Christ, most of it would have, and even the far outer walls were not there at the time of Jesus. And Golgotha and the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea were outside the second set of walls, but they would have been inside what became later this third set of walls that enlarged the city. So anyway, David goes to war against the Jebusites. He conquers them, and this now becomes his city, where his palace and capital will be. And from the beginning, David seems to have a plan to build a temple. If you're familiar with the story, we'll see a little bit more next time when we look at the life of Solomon. God does not allow David to build the temple, but David is involved in the plans for the temple and actually, pulling together the materials. But it'll be his son Solomon that actually builds the temple. But he also does a couple of interesting things. First of all, I think along with whatever spiritual reason, there was certainly a strategic reason for moving the capital to Jerusalem. And David had a challenge on his hands because he had these 12 tribes that oftentimes didn't get along with each other. The northern tribes seemed to be always a little bit more independent of the southern tribes. And so along with building a temple, one of the things that David did was that he had the Ark of the Covenant brought to Jerusalem. It had been outside any city for a number of years. You might remember the Philistines had captured it at a point in time. It had caused them so many problems that they gave it back to Israel, but it was kept, I believe, at the home of Abinadab. And so David comes and gets the Ark of the Covenant and brings it into Jerusalem. And strategically, what that did was it centralized the worship of Yahweh there in Jerusalem and became one of the ways in which David would, centralize worship and keep the tribes, together in a unified kind of a way. So David did this. And in his video, John, as he's talking a little bit about this, reminds his audience then of these well-known events in the life of David, and he comes to what I think is probably the second most well-known incident in the life of David, other than Goliath, and that, of course, is the story of David and Bathsheba. And it's a fascinating story. It's not only a story of David committing adultery, but it's also a story of how when Bathsheba becomes pregnant that he works to get rid of Bathsheba's husband, how Nathan the prophet confronts him. And John sort of teases his audience a little bit about how they really need to watch the video of 2 Samuel to get all of the lurid details. And so I'm gonna do the same thing. Instead of going into great detail on that incident, I would say, generally speaking, there are, many people in our culture that if you ask them if they know about the story of David and Bathsheba, they would know something about it, but what they probably wouldn't know is where in the world would you find that in the Bible. So again, 2 Samuel, this is one of the, I don't know if you want to call it a highlight or a low light of the book, but again, John is teasing a little bit about this. One of the things he doesn't talk about is that the child that is born to David and Bathsheba dies, and after the death of that child, Bathsheba conceives again, and after David has married her, and they have another child, and that child's name is Solomon. And of course, Solomon will become the third king of Israel's united kingdom, and he will be the main subject of the book of First Kings. And so again, all of this is contained in terms of the story of the birth of the new son Solomon. All of that contained in the 2 Samuel video. And so after shooting the video, Joy and John, they leave Rolla. They're headed for their next stop, or their 6th stop in Missouri, which will be Arlington, Missouri. And it'll be the 6th book of Israel's history. And it's called, again, First Kings, and is primarily tells us about the life of Solomon, which is what we will look at our next session together. So again, I just would encourage you to, again, as they take off, they're headed down the road again, I would really encourage you to take some time you have in your email, or if you got onto our journey off of Facebook, you have links. First link takes you to this short video that we're doing by way of introduction, tells you again a little bit about the story of the road to somewhere, but it also then, that second link will take you over to the book of 2 Samuel. If you're on a computer, you'll notice that down in the left-hand side of your screen, there's a box, and where you already can kind of see the beginning of that video on 2 Samuel. You just need to click on that box and it'll take you immediately over there. So you have a couple of different ways to get to 2 Samuel. Fascinating book. Again, the life of David is complex. He was a complex character, and yet really through him ultimately will come Jesus Christ, and Jesus will trace his lineage back to David. In 2 Samuel, God makes some amazing promises to him, and Christ is the fulfillment of those. So again, it's why it's important for you to watch that video. So thanks for joining in today, and again, I hope that you're having a good time. I guess, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but a meaningful time during Lent, and that you'll take time to watch that 2 Samuel video, and we will see you again next week for the 6th stop and the 6th session in season 2 of The Road to Somewhere.